Winston Churchill thought he had the Sicily campaign planned down to every detail. He was wrong. In May 1943, with the fate of the Mediterranean campaign hanging in the balance, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery was assigned to lead the conquest of Sicily. For Churchill, it was more than just a military objective, it was a statement to the world. The British were back, and they would prove their military excellence, alongside their American allies. Montgomery, a hero of El Alamein, was carefully chosen to showcase British strategy and experience. But then, something unexpected happened, something no one saw coming. General George S. Patton, leading the American forces, turned the operation into something of a race. Patton, not known for his subtlety, was determined to not just follow orders but to outpace Montgomery, pushing forward with a speed and aggression that no one had anticipated. Patton's actions contradicted the very nature of the Allied operation. He disregarded the notion of playing a supportive role. Instead, he seized the moment to push his forces ahead, defying Churchill's careful plans. What Churchill never anticipated, however, was that Patton's ambition would shift the balance of power in the Allied relationship, and perhaps even the course of the war. The shock for Churchill was not just the speed with which Patton moved, but how it disrupted his carefully constructed narrative. The operation wasn't supposed to be about the Americans proving themselves as independent leaders, but about reinforcing British supremacy. But Patton's brilliance, his refusal to follow the plan, meant something far more significant than just a tactical maneuver. It marked a turning point in the military dynamics of the Allies. Winston Churchill had carefully constructed a vision for the Sicily campaign that was meant to restore Britain's status as the leading military power in the Allied effort. For years, Britain had struggled with setbacks, and after the long dark days of retreat and defeat, a victory was essential. The invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, was not just a military objective, it was a chance for Britain to reclaim its place at the forefront of the war effort, with the British Army under Montgomery's command. The plan was simple. British forces would lead the charge, securing the eastern coast of Sicily, with American troops in supporting roles. Montgomery, fresh off his victory at El Alamein, was Churchill's chosen leader for the operation. He would demonstrate British professionalism and military superiority. Patton, the brash American general, would be relegated to playing a secondary role, ensuring the success of Montgomery's efforts. But Patton had different ideas. As soon as the operation began, Patton's aggression became apparent. He pushed forward, determined to be at the forefront of the campaign, ready to demonstrate American capabilities in a way that Churchill had not anticipated. Patton, with his characteristic bravado, refused to be a supporting player. For him, the invasion of Sicily was not just a matter of following orders, it was an opportunity to prove that American forces could lead and win on their own terms. Churchill, who had envisioned Montgomery as the hero of the operation, suddenly found himself in a difficult position. His carefully orchestrated narrative was slipping away, and the man he had expected to play second fiddle was now in the lead, shaping the course of the campaign. For Churchill, this was a moment of frustration. He had underestimated Patton's ambition and overestimated his control over the campaign's direction. Patton wasn't content to let British forces steal the spotlight, he was determined to prove that the Americans had their own place at the table. Patton's audacious approach was a disruption to Churchill's carefully crafted narrative, and it created a rift in the larger strategy, one that would force the British to reckon with the shift in military dynamics among the Allies. This wasn't just a race for Sicily, it was a battle for influence and prestige among the Allied leaders. Churchill had spent months, if not years, planning and preparing for the Sicily campaign. The stakes were high, not just militarily but politically as well. Following a series of setbacks, a victory in Sicily was to be the grand moment that would restore Britain's standing on the world stage. The carefully selected commander for this task, Montgomery, had already earned his stripes with a hard-fought victory in El Alamein. To Churchill, Montgomery represented the epitome of British military professionalism, and it was this same professionalism he wanted to showcase to the Allies and the world. Patton's role was clearly defined, he was to provide support. His mission was to assist Montgomery's forces in the conquest of Sicily, particularly in securing the western side of the island, while Montgomery took the lead in securing the eastern shores. The expectations placed upon Patton were clear. His forces would be used as a backup, moving behind Montgomery's advance, helping clear out pockets of resistance and ensuring the operation ran smoothly. The idea was that the Americans, though important, would remain in a secondary role, supporting the British effort. However, from the very beginning, it was clear that Patton had no intention of being sidelined. While Montgomery's forces slowly advanced along the eastern coast, Patton's 7th Army, with its characteristic vigor, pressed forward quickly. His forces captured the critical port of Gela and pressed toward the next major objective, Messina, at an astonishing pace. The speed and audacity of Patton's advance left the British forces struggling to keep up, while Montgomery was left dealing with logistics and supply issues. Patton's behavior caught Churchill off guard. Patton didn't just obey orders, he bent the mission to his will. The very thing Churchill had feared, a race between the British and Americans for control of Sicily, was happening. Patton's rapid movement created a situation where his forces were not just keeping up but, in many cases, outpacing Montgomery's. He wasn't content to merely support British efforts, Patton was now competing for glory. The British, including Montgomery, were furious. There was a deep sense of resentment from British commanders who saw Patton's actions as reckless, even disrespectful. They had expected him to play the supporting role, but instead, Patton had turned the operation into a contest, making it about speed and prestige. As British forces moved slower, Patton's unrelenting push forward made it clear that he was more than willing to take the credit for success in Sicily, regardless of Churchill's carefully laid plans. But Churchill's frustration grew even more pronounced as Patton's forces reached Messina first. This was a blow to his carefully constructed narrative about British superiority. The port city, which was to be the jewel of Montgomery's conquest, fell into American hands ahead of schedule and without the British military leading the charge. Churchill's worst fears had been realized, Patton had outperformed Montgomery, and in doing so, had stolen the spotlight. The Americans, led by Patton, had secured the victory and disrupted Churchill's vision of British dominance in the Mediterranean theater. In his private moments, Churchill's thoughts were sharp and bitter. While he publicly praised the Allied victory, he privately seethed at Patton's audacity. He had lost the race to Messina, and with it, the opportunity to claim the victory as a testament to British military leadership. Patton's actions had redefined the dynamics of the campaign and forced Churchill to reckon with the rising influence of American forces in the Mediterranean. The most significant moment that proved Patton's defiance of Churchill's carefully crafted strategy came when he reached Messina. Churchill had expected Montgomery to be the first to capture the port city, a key location in the campaign. It was meant to showcase British prowess and leadership. But instead, it was Patton's forces that captured Messina, not only ahead of schedule but with an efficiency that left the British scrambling to keep up. Patton's success wasn't by accident. His strategy was methodical, and it was clear that he had no intention of merely following Montgomery's pace. His forces advanced quickly, driving through difficult terrain and under harsh weather conditions, all while maintaining a high level of combat effectiveness. He didn't wait for the perfect conditions, and he didn't let the British take the lead. Patton's focus was on achieving the mission as swiftly and decisively as possible. For Churchill, this moment was a bitter pill. Not only had Patton outperformed the British in terms of speed and precision, but he had also disrupted the narrative Churchill had worked so hard to create. The idea that the British would be seen as the primary contributors to Sicily's liberation was shattered. Instead, Patton's American forces were front and center. This wasn't just a small tactical victory, it was a direct challenge to Churchill's view of the American military's role in the war. Churchill's frustration was compounded by the fact that Patton had not only achieved the objective but had done so with a level of operational excellence that even British commanders, who were quick to criticize his methods, could not ignore. Patton had proven that American forces could operate with speed, agility, and precision, qualities that Churchill hadn't expected to see, especially not before British forces could make their mark. Churchill's frustration deepened as the weeks following the capture of Messina revealed the full extent of Patton's influence. Not only had he outpaced Montgomery, but the speed with which Patton's forces moved through Sicily forced the British to re-evaluate their military assumptions. Churchill, who had placed Montgomery in a position to lead, was now forced to contend with the fact that Patton's rapid success had shifted the narrative of the campaign. Patton's ability to execute under pressure was evident in his handling of logistics and command, both of which were seen as the true measures of military competence. His Third Army had swiftly reoriented from the battles in the south and turned northward, making adjustments that many believed were impossible due to the terrain, weather, and the demands of coordinating such a large-scale operation. The logistical planning required to move divisions, tanks, and support equipment in record time through Sicily's mountainous landscape was a feat that Patton's staff managed with remarkable efficiency. What made this achievement even more striking was that, despite his usual bravado and controversial personality, Patton had mastered the art of preparation. He didn't wait for Montgomery to make decisions or for conditions to improve, he anticipated the needs of the operation and adapted his forces accordingly. This foresight and planning proved to be key in executing the rapid advance that led to the Americans reaching Messina first. For Churchill, this was more than just a tactical setback, it was an emotional blow. The operation was supposed to highlight British leadership, but instead, Patton had reshaped the mission, proving that the Americans could execute flawlessly under pressure. Patton's success in Sicily revealed that American forces, under his command, were capable of extraordinary feats that even the British had to acknowledge. Churchill's public persona was that of a steady, unflappable leader, someone who had steered Britain through its darkest hours and emerged with confidence. But behind the scenes, the situation in Sicily revealed his vulnerability. He had placed his faith in Montgomery and had expected the British forces to dominate the operation, both militarily and symbolically. Instead, the rapid success of Patton's forces undermined not only his plans for the campaign but also his carefully cultivated image of British supremacy in the Allied effort. As news of Patton's advance spread, Churchill found himself in a difficult position. He had to maintain diplomatic relations with the Americans, who were now fully aware of Patton's achievement, while also dealing with the resentment from British commanders who felt sidelined by the American general's audacity. For Churchill, this moment was more than just a military setback, it was an emotional blow to his pride. He had been so focused on securing British dominance that Patton's actions forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: American forces were now at the forefront, and they were proving themselves in ways he hadn't anticipated. The emotional toll on Churchill was profound. His letters from the period reflect a man grappling with his own sense of control. As the situation unfolded, Churchill had to balance his disappointment with the reality that Patton's success had reshaped the Allies' approach to the campaign. In private, Churchill admitted to his close advisers that he had underestimated the capabilities of the American forces and overestimated the need for British leadership. It was a humbling moment for a leader who had spent years positioning Britain as the cornerstone of the Allied war effort. This vulnerability, however, was part of what made Churchill such a powerful leader. He faced this setback head-on, understanding that sometimes, even the best-laid plans can be disrupted by forces beyond one's control. While Patton's audacity and speed were undeniable, not everyone was convinced that his actions in Sicily were as praiseworthy as they seemed. Many British officers, and even some American commanders, were deeply skeptical about Patton's approach. They saw his rapid movements not as a victory but as a reckless gamble that could have easily backfired. Patton's refusal to follow a coordinated plan with Montgomery and his aggressive push for glory raised questions about the long-term strategic consequences of such a high-risk approach. The skepticism from British commanders like Montgomery was particularly sharp. They believed that Patton's decision to take the lead in Sicily disrupted the overall strategic goals of the Allies. The British had been fighting in North Africa and the Mediterranean long before the Americans, and they were determined to prove that British military experience could still lead the way. Patton's independent advance was seen as undermining British authority and signaling to the world that the Americans were now calling the shots in the Mediterranean, not the British. In addition, some of Patton's subordinates were concerned about the toll that his breakneck speed and aggressive tactics might have on the troops. While his forces were moving quickly, they were also suffering from fatigue and logistical challenges. The heavy emphasis on speed meant that soldiers had to fight through difficult conditions without adequate time for rest or supply replenishment. The risk of operational failure, even after Patton's success, loomed large. What if the Germans had reinforced their positions or launched a counterattack in the wake of Patton's offensive? Some wondered if Patton's strategy was simply a lucky break rather than the brilliance it was made out to be. This skepticism wasn't just limited to the British. Even within the American ranks, there were concerns about Patton's unorthodox methods. Some feared that Patton's desire for personal glory could cloud his judgment, leading to hasty decisions that could put both his men and the broader Allied effort at risk. Nonetheless, Patton's success in Sicily eventually silenced many critics. His gamble paid off, proving that his boldness could, in fact, deliver remarkable results. The dramatic events of the Sicily campaign ultimately forced Churchill to confront a harsh reality. American forces, led by Patton, were no longer a secondary element in the Allied effort, they were now a dominant force. Patton's boldness and speed in capturing Messina had not only shocked the British but had also shifted the military balance within the alliance. For Churchill, the moment was a reminder that leadership in war was not about controlling every detail, it was about responding to the unforeseen and adjusting to new realities. Reflecting on the initial shock of Patton's advance, Churchill came to understand the underlying power dynamics at play. Patton had made good on his promise, he had delivered when the odds were against him, and in doing so, he had proven the value of American leadership. Even though the British had held on to their traditional role as the strategists and tacticians of the Allies, it was clear that Patton's operational success had placed him at the forefront of the campaign. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a shift in the narrative of the war, one where American forces could no longer be sidelined. Churchill's private thoughts, recorded in his letters and diaries, reveal a complex mix of admiration and frustration. He admired Patton's capabilities as a military leader, but he also recognized that the rapid pace of American operations would change the perception of the Allies' military structure. The relationship between the British and American forces would no longer be one of unequal support, it would be a more dynamic partnership, with the Americans increasingly taking the lead. In the end, Patton's triumph in Sicily forced Churchill to acknowledge the changing tides of war, a reminder that the battlefield, much like the course of history, is shaped by those bold enough to act when the moment calls for it. The events in Sicily fundamentally changed the relationship between the British and American forces during World War II. Churchill had, for so long, held to the belief that Britain's experience and leadership would shape the course of the war, especially in the Mediterranean. But Patton's actions in Sicily forced a reckoning. In proving that the Americans could lead and deliver at a pace previously thought impossible, he altered the course of military strategy within the Allied forces. For Churchill, this wasn't just a blow to his pride, it was a recalibration of how he viewed his American allies. Despite his earlier skepticism, Patton's success in Sicily could not be ignored. It was a moment when the Americans not only held their own but outpaced the British, shifting the perception of American military prowess in the process. The victory at Messina, though seen by many as part of the Allied effort, became synonymous with Patton's name, forever tying his legacy to the operational brilliance that he demonstrated on the battlefield. Churchill's reflections in the aftermath of the campaign were telling. While he publicly praised the collective victory, he privately admitted the profound shift that had occurred. Patton had done more than lead an army, he had redefined the strategic landscape of the war and forced the British to acknowledge that American forces were no longer just auxiliaries. They were now, undeniably, key players. This moment in history serves as a reminder that in war, as in life, the unexpected often defines the future. Patton's boldness, determination, and unyielding drive not only altered the course of the Sicily campaign but also established the United States as a dominant military force, reshaping the dynamic of the entire Allied war effort. If this story of leadership under pressure, military rivalry, and the shifting balance of power among the Allies intrigued you, don't miss the next chapter in this series. There are countless untold moments from history that reveal the complexities of command and the real people behind the military legends. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss future videos diving into the unseen sides of wartime strategy and leadership. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on the dynamic between Churchill and Patton. How do you think their rivalry influenced the outcome of World War II? Were you surprised by Patton's ability to shift the tide in Sicily, or did you expect this kind of impact? If you found this story insightful, share it with anyone interested in leadership, military history, or the intricate relationships that shape world events. We'll bring you more untold moments, lessons from the past, and insights into the minds of history's greatest commanders. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes, the most remarkable outcomes come from those who dare to challenge expectations.